What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video on the channel, and in this video I'm going to be talking about the NBA and specifically the Miami Heat because they are the biggest story in the league right now because Jimmy Butler has officially requested a trade from the team after 6 seasons. And if you look at this is a developing story, but it is something that has been building up to this point because when you look back at last season, after the Heat made the playoffs, after winning in the play-in tournament against the Philadelphia 76ers, if you don't remember, Jimmy Butler got injured in that game, so the Heat had to play their entire 5-game first-round series against the Boston Celtics, the eventual champions, without him. And during that series, or maybe it was a little bit after, Jimmy Butler said that if I had been on the court, we would have beaten the Boston Celtics. And after those comments came out, Pat Riley, general manager of the Heat, said that if you aren't on the court playing, then you should keep your mouth shut. That's basically word for word what he said, and people wondered if this was a shot at Butler for not being on the court when he maybe could have, if he was injured and just decided not to play. I don't know what it was. And then later in the offseason, Riley declined on giving Butler a max contract extension. Right now, Butler is in the midst of a 3-year, $146 million deal, and he's making $48 million this season. So that was during the offseason. He didn't want to give Jimmy a max extension. And so now going into this season, fast forward, Miami's 6th in the Eastern Conference, 17-15 record. They're 5-5 in their last 10 games. And if you look at Jimmy Butler's stats across the board, they're all down. His points are down, his three-point shooting is down, his assists are down. Pretty much all of his numbers are worse than last season and the previous seasons because normally Jimmy Butler is good for 20 points a game in the regular season, and then everybody expects that to go up in the playoffs because he turns into playoff Jimmy and he basically always plays really well on the biggest stage, and he wasn't able to last year because he was injured. But despite all of this, despite Jimmy's numbers being down, despite everything that happened in the offseason, and despite the Heat once again being just an average basketball team, Pat Riley said, he came out and said that we are not trading Jimmy Butler. This was a few weeks ago. The Heat aren't going to trade Butler. They're not listening to offers, so teams might as well just not say anything. But then recently, a few days ago, Jimmy Butler officially requested a trade after he said in an interview that he wasn't happy playing basketball anymore. And so then he officially requested a trade from the team, and he said that I want to play anywhere but Miami. Like, just get me out of Miami. I'll play anywhere but here. And so now the Heat are officially listening to trade offers for Jimmy Butler. And so when it went from Pat Riley saying we're not going to trade Jimmy Butler to Jimmy Butler saying, I want out, I just want to get out of Miami, this to me feels like a situation that is not repairable. I think Jimmy Butler is going to be traded maybe within the next few days because Pat Riley suspended him for 7 games, and that's a long time to suspend your own player for what he called conduct detrimental to the team. And so I think Jimmy Butler played his last game in a Heat uniform, and in that last game in a Heat uniform, at least that's what I think it will be, he only scored 9 points, and in the last 2 games, including that game, he scored 18 points and only taken 11 shots. So you can tell that Jimmy Butler just doesn't want to be on the Heat anymore because there's no way you're the number 1 option on a team that is a playoff contender, and you're one of the best players in the league, one of the best clutch players in the league, the whole ordeal. There's no way you only take 11 shots and score 18 points in 2 games unless you're injured or you're just not trying, because I think Jimmy was on the court simply not trying, just sending a message to the Heat that, hey, you better trade me because I don't want to be here anymore, which I don't think is the best thing to do. I would say that Jimmy deserves part of the blame in this situation because I don't think he's handling it as well as he maybe could have. Expressing that you want out in the media, fine, go ahead, but on the court you shouldn't be not trying, because I don't think it's a good message to send to teams that you want to get out of Miami, but if I don't get my way, I'm just not going to try and I'm going to basically pout. And then I think Pat Riley also deserves the blame because I don't think he's done a good job of capitalizing on the Jimmy Butler era in Miami, because his first season there, they were a 5th seed in the East. They were a really, really good team, and they were viewed as a sleeper team going into the playoffs. It wasn't like 2023 when it was a complete shock that they even basically won a playoff game. Not a playoff series, a playoff game. Because a lot of people, including myself, thought that they were going to get swept in the 2023 playoffs by the Bucks in the first round because they barely made it out of the play-in tournament. They had to play in both playing games just to get the 8th seed, and Jimmy Butler had to drag them to the playoffs. And I thought the Bucks were just going to have their way with them in the first round, and obviously that didn't happen. But when you look at Jimmy's first season in Miami, the 2019 to 2020 season, the season that got cut short due to COVID and then they went to the bubble, Miami was a very good team in the regular season. Jimmy Butler and Bam, everybody was clicking, Tyler Hero, all those guys, and they captured the 5th seed. And going into the playoffs, the whole thing on the Heat was watch out for them. They could be a sleeper team. And they did their damage in the first round. They beat the Pacers pretty easily. I think that was a 5-game series. It might have been a sweep. I don't really remember. But then they beat the Bucks in 5-2. And people weren't really expecting that. They were like, hey, they could give the Bucks some trouble. Maybe push it to like 6, maybe 7 games. But they did their thing against Milwaukee. They beat the Bucks in the second round. They beat the Celtics in the conference finals. And then they gave the Lakers fits in the finals. Jimmy Butler and the Heat won 2 games. And Butler played his butt off in the finals. He put up really, really good numbers and almost carried the Heat to maybe a 7th game. Tried to make it a competitive series. Didn't really happen. And then the next season, they were kind of just COVID riddled. Got swept by Milwaukee in the first round. And so that didn't work out. But then the next year they come back. And then they go to the conference finals. They were the number 1 seed in the regular season. And then the year after that, obviously, they go to the NBA finals. So basically, when the Heat have been healthy with Jimmy Butler there, they've gone to, it was finals, conference finals, finals. And Pat Riley didn't do anything to capitalize on all the success that Jimmy Butler had with the Heat. Because let's face it, that Miami Heat roster is extremely limited, and it's not as star heavy as some of the other teams in the East, like a Boston, a Cleveland this year who's really good, a Milwaukee who has Dame and I believe the best player in the NBA and Giannis, and even an Orlando team that with a healthy Paolo Banchero, a healthy Franz Wagner, I think they're more top heavy than Miami at this point if all their guys are healthy. But the Magic have just been riddled with injuries this year. Paolo Banchero is recovering from a torn oblique. Franz Wagner has that same exact injury. They lost Mo Wagner for the season with a torn ACL. And Jalen Suggs just got injured in a game a few days ago against the Raptors, non-contact injury. And so Orlando's been injury-riddled this year. Miami hasn't, but their roster just isn't good enough. It's never really been good enough to put them over the hump. And there was just something about those runs from the Heat that just didn't feel real almost. They felt kind of fluky, especially 2023. And Jimmy played really well in the playoffs, I get that. But as a GM and Pat Riley, you have to now make a move to capitalize on that. You got to move some pieces to get a star in there. You got to get Dame. You got to get Donovan Mitchell. You got to get somebody that will help complement what Jimmy Butler gives you in the playoffs as a scorer. And he never decided to do that. And so the Heat had the same limitations going into every season. Like I said earlier in the video, they're just an average to above average team that has a defined ceiling, and they're able to maybe push that ceiling in the playoffs because of how good Jimmy Butler is able to perform. And so when you look at what not capitalizing on those opportunities has gotten them to, your best player now wants out, and you're kind of in a tough situation because, one, it's going to be hard to move him because his contract is terrible. I mentioned it earlier in the video. $150 million basically for 3 years for a guy who's 35 years old, who's injury prone, and let's just face it, his intangibles aren't that great either, because when you look at how his tenure ended with the Bulls, it wasn't great there, so they shipped him to Minnesota. And then everybody remembers how ugly the breakup was between Jimmy Butler and the Minnesota Timberwolves. There was that famous story of him taking on the Timberwolves starters with the third stringers in practice, and he did his thing. He dominated the starters, and maybe at the time he was right about the Timberwolves being a soft team. They weren't the team that was really ready to go out there and compete every single night. But the way he chose to exit the Timberwolves, it was unprofessional. It wasn't something that like really excites people about having you on their basketball team. And then they traded him to Philly. He was there for not even, I think, like 3/4 of the season in 2018, 2019. They lost in Game 7 to Toronto. And then the 76ers decided to keep Tobias Harris over Jimmy Butler. And so Jimmy Butler goes to Miami in free agency that offseason. And I think Jimmy also just didn't like playing with Ben Simmons either. There was definitely something going on with that dynamic. And so all of Jimmy Butler's all of Butler's exits from his teams, they all end this way. They all end ugly. Now on the Heat, you have him saying, I don't like playing basketball anymore because the Heat aren't good and I don't have joy playing basketball anymore. And he said he can't get that joy back. And now he's on the court basically not trying at all. 18 points and 11 shots in 2 games is just not acceptable. Like, you have to take more shots than that if you're on the court playing. And so there's teams that are interested in Jimmy Butler. The Warriors have been mentioned as a team that's possibly interested. The Houston Rockets are a team that have been rumored to be interested. And then Shams Charania reported that the Suns were an interested team. And then Butler's agent was like, no way, that's not true. And there was a whole thing going on with that. But Shams did nail his reporting and that Jimmy Butler wanted to be traded. And after Shams reported that he wanted to be traded, he was asked about that. And it was like 2 weeks ago, Butler was asked about that. And he kind of denied it, but also kind of didn't deny it at the same time. And remember, he showed up in like orange hair dye the next day to kind of like poke fun at the report of him wanting to go to the Suns. But Shams nailed that story, and he wanted to be traded, and now it's official. And he's currently serving a 7-game suspension for the Heat. And so I think Miami's trying to get him out of there. And of those teams that I listed, I think the Warriors would be the best option basketball-wise, because I just think Golden State needs a lot of help right now. Steph Curry's on the court doing basically everything. They already traded for Dennis Schroeder, and I don't think that trade has panned out exactly how they thought it would through the first few games of him being there. They traded DeAnthony Melton to get Dennis Schroeder, a guy they signed in the offseason because he has a torn ACL. And their young guys aren't really playing consistently like Steve Kerr and the team thought they would. Brandon Podziemski, Warriors fans are calling for him to get traded. Jonathan Kuminga, you see flashes with him, but it's not consistent every single night to make you think this guy can help complement Steph and get him one more championship while he's still in his prime. Guys like Moses Moody aren't really doing the job. Trace Jackson Davis, he's a really good like role player, but he's not a guy that's going to be part of the big reason why you win a championship. And so I think in the short term, Jimmy Butler on the Warriors sounds good. It could be good for Steph. It also provides them with like a little mix-up offensively because he can operate in the mid-range while Steph goes on the perimeter. So like I don't think the fit would be terrible either, because one, I think Steph can really play with anybody because he's willing to take a back seat. Not take a back seat, but sacrifice a little bit to make people feel comfortable. He did it with Kevin Durant. I think he could do it with Jimmy Butler. And so I think that could be a good fit. The Houston Rockets, I don't like that at all. I wouldn't break up my young core for a guy in Jimmy Butler, because unlike the Warriors young players, the young players on the Rockets have shown that they have a ton of potential. And if Houston just keeps working that out, just keeps getting guys more comfortable playing with each other, I think that could be a team that's really, really good in a few years. Alperen Sengun is obviously leading the charge with that. He's going to be one of the best bigs in the NBA behind Nikola Jokic and Victor Wembanyama in the Western Conference. And then you still have guys like Giannis, Embiid, Paolo in the East. He's going to be one of the best bigs in the NBA. Jalen Green, I'm not as big a fan of because I think his inefficiency is just kind of, I don't really like it, but he does show flashes of being very good. Fred VanVleet has proven to be a good fit there. Young like role players like Amen Thompson and Tari Eason, I think they make the Rockets really good too. And so I'm not going to break that up for a guy in Jimmy Butler who's aging, injury prone, can't really shoot threes, and let's just face it, wherever he gets traded, how do we know how it's going to end? It's probably going to end badly because it's ended badly on literally every team he's been on. And so let me know what you guys think about this whole Jimmy Butler situation. Where do you think he's going to get traded? How soon do you think he will get traded? And I will be uploading more videos. Took a little bit of a break, but I had to come back and talk about this because this is just a crazy story with Jimmy Butler and the Heat, because it's been the same thing the last 6 years in Miami. They've had basically the same roster, and now I guess Jimmy's just had enough. So let me know what you guys think about this whole situation with Jimmy Butler. Thank you for watching this video. Make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and find the rest of my content linked in the description.